In January 2023, in a quiet neighborhood in New Orleans, Louisiana, lived Evelyn Rose, a 35-year-old woman, along with her husband Harper Rose, who was 40. They had been married for 15 years, and their marriage was often viewed as the epitome of harmony. Everyone in the neighborhood admired them for their closeness and family unity. They had an 18-year-old daughter named Avery, who had just started college and was eagerly returning home for the winter break. Evelyn and Harper seemed like the perfect couple. They were always seen together at local events, smiling, holding hands, and exuding an air of contentment that made others around them aspire to have similar relationships. The neighbors admired their bond and often invited them to dinners and social gatherings, curious about how they maintained such intimacy after so many years of marriage. Avery, their daughter, was considered the perfect blend of both her parents, both in looks and personality. Her return from college was a big event for the family. Evelyn meticulously prepared the house for Avery's arrival, decorating the living room with family photos and preparing her daughter's favorite dishes. Harper also took part in the preparations, setting up Avery's room just as she had left it, making sure that everything felt familiar and warm for her return. On the evening of January 4th, the Roses hosted a cozy gathering with close friends and family to celebrate Avery's return. The atmosphere was cheerful, and the house was filled with laughter. Harper held Evelyn and Avery close as they greeted guests, and everyone noticed the strength of their bond. Throughout the evening, there were joyful conversations about life at college, shared stories, and hopes for the future. Yet amidst the warmth and laughter, there was something Evelyn couldn't quite place. At times, Harper and Avery exchanged glances that no one seemed to notice except for her. It was fleeting, a passing look between father and daughter, but it made Evelyn feel unsettled. She dismissed it, attributing her unease to the stress of hosting the gathering and her excitement about having her daughter home again. After the celebration, life seemed to return to normal. Harper resumed his work, and Evelyn settled back into her routines of managing the household. Avery appeared relaxed, enjoying the time spent with her parents before returning to college. The three of them shared meals together every night, discussing their day and sharing stories as they always had. However, that feeling of unease didn't completely fade away for Evelyn. When Harper took Avery to town for errands or to meet her friends, Evelyn found herself watching them more closely than she had before. She tried to convince herself that nothing was wrong. After all, Harper and Avery had always been close. But sometimes, late at night, when she was alone in their bedroom, Evelyn couldn't shake the sense that something was different, something was changing in their home. In early February, just a month after Avery's return, Evelyn began to notice small, strange details in their daily life. Harper and Avery were spending more time together than usual, but not in the way that a father and daughter typically would. They would often disappear into Avery's room, talking quietly behind closed doors, and Evelyn felt as though there was an invisible barrier between them and her. It wasn't overt, they still shared meals and laughed at the dinner table, but there was a growing distance that Evelyn couldn't ignore. One evening, during dinner, Harper and Avery exchanged a quick, knowing look. It was subtle, but Evelyn noticed. A feeling of anxiety crept into her chest, but she forced herself to push it away. She rationalized that they were just reconnecting after being apart for so long. Harper was simply being a loving father, and Avery had always been his pride and joy. Still, the glances between them were becoming more frequent, and at times, they would stop talking when Evelyn entered the room. By February 6th, Evelyn's suspicions were starting to weigh heavily on her. That night, she awoke to find that Harper was not in bed beside her. Thinking he had gone downstairs to get a glass of water, she quietly made her way to the kitchen. But as she passed Avery's room, she noticed the light was on. Curious, she approached the door, and to her surprise, she heard hushed voices inside. Her heart began to race as she carefully knocked on the door. The voices immediately stopped, and after a few seconds, Harper opened the door. He smiled and explained that Avery couldn't sleep and had asked him to sit with her. Evelyn nodded, trying to mask the discomfort bubbling inside her. She returned to bed, but the image of Harper in Avery's room in the middle of the night stayed with her like a dark shadow. As the days went by, Harper and Avery's closeness continued to gnaw at Evelyn's mind. On February 11th, while having lunch, Harper unexpectedly suggested that he and Avery go into town together the following day, a day when Evelyn had plans with her friends. "Just the two of us," Harper said with a glance at Avery. Avery smiled and agreed to the suggestion without hesitation. Evelyn forced herself to smile, telling herself that it was just a father-daughter outing, but a knot formed in her stomach. On February 16th, Evelyn returned home earlier than expected from work. As she walked through the front door, she heard quiet laughter coming from the living room. She peeked in and saw Harper and Avery sitting closely together on the couch, looking at something on Avery's phone. The moment they realized Evelyn was there, Avery quickly turned away, and Harper stood up, flustered. "You're home early," Harper said, his voice tense. The suspicion that had been slowly building inside Evelyn became almost unbearable. She could no longer dismiss the strange looks, the whispers, the way they seemed to act differently when she was around. Something was deeply wrong, and for the first time, Evelyn began to wonder if her perfect family was hiding something terrible. By mid-February, Evelyn could no longer ignore the growing sense of dread that something was seriously wrong in her family. Her once unshakable trust in Harper had started to crumble. Despite her best efforts to rationalize the strange occurrences, the unease gnawed at her every waking moment. The more she observed Harper and Avery, the more she noticed the secret glances, the quiet conversations that ceased the moment she entered the room. It was as if they were both hiding something from her, something that became clearer with every passing day. On February 18th, the tension reached a breaking point. Evelyn had planned to take on an extra shift at work, but her plans changed unexpectedly, allowing her to return home much earlier than anticipated. She hoped to surprise Harper and Avery, who were supposed to be out running errands. But as she walked through the front door, the sound of soft laughter echoed through the house once again. Evelyn followed the sound to the living room and stopped dead in her tracks. There, on the couch, sat Harper and Avery, their heads close together, sharing a private moment over something on Harper's phone. They didn't notice her at first, but when Avery suddenly glanced up, her smile dropped, and she quickly pulled away from her father. Harper stood up awkwardly, a nervous smile on his face. "You're back early," he said, his voice tense. Evelyn forced herself to smile, masking the storm of emotions rising within her. She mumbled something about a change in her schedule and hurried to the kitchen, her fists clenched as she tried to control her trembling hands. She couldn't deny it any longer. Something deeply inappropriate was happening between her husband and her daughter. Her heart raced as her thoughts spiraled into darker territories, but she still didn't have any proof, just a gut-wrenching feeling that twisted inside her. Over the next few days, Evelyn's behavior became more cautious and observant. She began to notice how Harper and Avery would lower their voices or stop speaking altogether whenever she was near. They shared secretive looks during meals, and their interactions grew increasingly tense around her presence. What once seemed like innocent father-daughter closeness now felt like something much more sinister, something that Evelyn couldn't yet fully grasp but could no longer ignore. On February 22nd, while Harper was at work and Avery was out running errands, Evelyn decided she couldn't wait any longer. She needed answers. Determined to find out the truth, she cautiously made her way into Harper's study, where he often kept his phone. She had always respected his privacy, never once feeling the need to check his messages or emails. But today, something had shifted inside her. She could no longer trust the man she had spent the last 15 years with. With trembling hands, she unlocked Harper's phone, using the password she had memorized but never used before. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrolled through his messages, her eyes scanning for anything unusual. At first, everything seemed normal, just work emails, messages from friends, and the usual mundane conversations. But then, she stumbled upon a message thread with Avery. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she opened the conversation. The earlier messages were innocent enough, talking about school and errands, but as she scrolled further, her worst fears were confirmed. One message, dated February 18th, read, "I miss our time alone together." Her hands went cold, and she could barely breathe. Evelyn reread the message over and over again, hoping she had misinterpreted it. But the meaning was clear. The exchange between Harper and Avery wasn't just about father-daughter bonding. It was something far more disturbing, something that shattered the very foundation of the life she thought she had built with Harper. The message played on a loop in her mind, twisting her thoughts into a chaotic mess of anger, disbelief, and betrayal. How long had this been going on? How could Harper have done this? And worse, how could Avery, a girl she had raised and loved unconditionally, be a part of something so vile? The following day, Evelyn confronted Harper, though she was not ready to reveal what she knew. Instead, she watched him closely, waiting for him to slip up. He smiled at her, kissed her on the cheek, and acted as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed for Evelyn. She felt a mixture of rage and despair brewing inside her, knowing that the man she had loved for so long was keeping such a devastating secret from her. By February 25th, Evelyn could no longer bear the weight of her suspicions. She decided to investigate further, this time turning her attention to Avery. When Harper and Avery left for what they said was a quick trip to the store, Evelyn seized the opportunity. She went to Avery's room and began searching through her belongings, looking for anything that might confirm what she feared. It didn't take long for her to find something. Tucked away beneath Avery's bed was a small box. Inside, Evelyn found notes, handwritten love letters in Harper's unmistakable handwriting. One of the notes was dated February 14th, Valentine's Day. It read, "You are the meaning of my life." Evelyn's heart shattered as she read the words. Tears welled up in her eyes as the realization hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just a brief indiscretion. It was a full-blown relationship that had been hidden from her for God knows how long. The love letters, the secretive glances, the late-night conversations, it all added up. Her husband and daughter had betrayed her in the worst possible way. The pain was overwhelming, but alongside it came a surge of anger. How could they do this to her? How could they destroy everything she had worked so hard to build? Evelyn knew she couldn't confront them right away. She needed to gather her thoughts, to plan her next move. But one thing was certain, this wasn't something she could simply forgive or forget. As she sat alone in Avery's room, clutching the love notes in her hands, Evelyn made a silent vow to herself. They would pay for this betrayal. She didn't know how or when, but she would make sure that Harper and Avery suffered for what they had done. For now, she would wait. But the rage inside her was growing, and soon, it would consume her completely. By early March 2023, Evelyn had reached a breaking point. The betrayal of Harper and Avery had consumed her entirely, poisoning her thoughts day and night. Every glance, every word they spoke to each other only fueled the fire burning within her. She had seen enough, read the messages, found the love notes, and observed their suspicious behavior. There was no doubt left in her mind that her husband and her daughter had crossed a line that could never be forgiven. On March 5th, Evelyn made a decision. She couldn't live like this anymore, drowning in her own misery while they continued to act as if nothing had happened. She needed to confront them, to make them face the truth of what they had done. That evening, when Harper and Avery returned from another one of their errands, she told them they needed to talk. "We need to discuss our relationships," she said, her voice calm but icy. "All of us." Harper and Avery exchanged a quick, worried glance, but they agreed. The three of them sat down in the living room, a heavy tension hanging in the air. Evelyn could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the rage barely contained beneath her composed exterior. As they sat down, Harper tried to steer the conversation towards something casual, but Evelyn cut him off. She had no patience for small talk. Without warning, she pulled out her phone and opened the incriminating messages between Harper and Avery. "Explain this," she said coldly, pushing the phone across the table toward Harper. The color drained from Harper's face as he glanced at the screen. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Avery, who had been sitting silently beside him, looked down at her lap, her face pale. "This isn't what you think it is," Harper finally said, his voice shaky. "It's a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Evelyn's voice rose, her control slipping as the anger surged through her. "Do you think I'm a fool? I've seen the messages, the notes, the way you two act around me. You've been lying to me for months." Avery remained silent, tears welling up in her eyes as she stared at the floor. Harper, desperate, tried to reach out to Evelyn, but she recoiled, pulling back from his touch as if it burned her. "Don't you dare touch me," she hissed. "I want the truth. No more lies, no more excuses. I deserve to know everything." The room was filled with an unbearable silence. Evelyn's words hung in the air, the weight of her demand pressing down on Harper and Avery. Finally, Harper spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "All right," he said, defeated. "I admit it. Something has been happening between Avery and me, but it was a mistake." "A mistake?" Evelyn's voice trembled with fury. "A mistake that's been going on for months? You think this is something I can just forgive?" Harper didn't answer, his head hanging in shame. Avery, on the other hand, was quietly sobbing, her body trembling as she tried to stifle her tears. Evelyn couldn't take it anymore. The pain, the betrayal, it was too much. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor as she knocked it over. Her hands were shaking, her vision blurred by the rage consuming her. "I gave you everything," she said, her voice breaking. "I loved you both, and this is how you repay me?" Neither Harper nor Avery said a word. The silence felt suffocating, pressing in on Evelyn from all sides. She could feel her control slipping away completely. The betrayal had shattered something deep inside her, something that could never be repaired. On March 12, Evelyn's mind was set. She had been carrying around the weight of her husband and daughter's betrayal long enough, and she could no longer bear it. In her mind, a plan began to form, a way to finally take control of the situation, to make Harper and Avery pay for what they had done. Over the next few days, Evelyn methodically began preparing. She knew Harper and Avery were still hiding things from her, still trying to keep up appearances as if they could just move on. But Evelyn was past the point of caring about their lies. Her calm demeanor in those days, the way she moved through the house with a sense of purpose, began to unsettle both Harper and Avery. They noticed her silence, her coldness, but neither dared to push her. Deep down, they knew something was terribly wrong. By April 17, Evelyn was ready. She suggested to Harper and Avery that they have one final dinner together, an opportunity to talk openly, to resolve things as a family. Harper, desperate to smooth things over, agreed, and Avery, though hesitant, followed her father's lead. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the tension was palpable. Evelyn had prepared their favorite dishes, setting the table with a care that seemed almost unnatural given the circumstances. Harper and Avery both tried to make small talk, but Evelyn barely responded, her eyes fixed on the two of them with an icy calm that made them nervous. As the meal progressed, Harper, sensing something was wrong, finally spoke up. "Evelyn, we need to talk about this. I know things have been difficult, but we can move past it. We can start fresh." Evelyn looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she pulled out a folded note from her pocket, the same love note she had found in Avery's room, written in Harper's handwriting. She placed it on the table in front of them. "Read it," she said softly, her voice betraying no emotion. Harper's face went pale as he realized what it was. His hands trembled as he picked up the note, but before he could say anything, Evelyn stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "No more lies," she said, her voice rising. "You've destroyed this family." In a blur of motion, Evelyn grabbed a knife from the table, her hands shaking with rage and grief. Harper, realizing the danger, tried to stop her, but it was too late. In the chaos that followed, screams filled the air, and the world seemed to slow to a standstill. At 8:17 p.m., the house was silent again. Blood stained Evelyn's hands as she stood over Harper's motionless body. Avery knelt beside him, her sobs echoing through the room, but it was too late. Harper's eyes were closed, his body still. Evelyn dropped the knife, her hands trembling, her mind numb from the horror of what she had done. She backed away, collapsing onto the floor as the weight of her actions finally hit her. Outside, the distant sound of sirens approached, but inside the house, everything had already fallen apart. The family that had once seemed so perfect had been destroyed, leaving only silence and devastation in its wake.